Mach 3, give me crew show on 2, 3, and 4.
Line 1, exit 1.
6, 3. Mach 3, give me start line 2.
5 electric. Mach 3. Line 1.
Mach 3, give me start line 1 and crew show on 7 and 9.
Line 1, crew show 7 and 9, Mach 3.
Yeah, do something. I hate weapons.
Super Op, line 3, red ball, avionics.
Super Ops. Line 7 is code 3 for light in the gear handle.
Fuck. Hey, so I started a Patreon because frankly, this stuff's getting expensive. Nothing will change the podcast or the blog if you don't subscribe, but if you want early access to episodes, monthly AMAs, episode shoutouts, voting on podcast topics, and all kinds of 20 Years Done gear, head over to patreon.com/20yearsdone. This month's top tier Patreon shoutout goes to Robbie Walker, Travis Barnes, Kevin Traw, and JT Owens. Thanks for the support. Okay, so today we're joined once again by Chief Master Sergeant retired Kurtis Ott. Somebody that's been on the podcast. I think you're on your 4th episode now.
Fourth.
Look
That's
at you.
true.
You're
Fourth.
like you're the new thing, right? It took Kevin,
Sure.
who's currently listening, it took Kevin like 35 episodes to become 4th. And now look at you. You're the guy. So, I reached out to you because I wanted to talk about the recent article I wrote about the SECDEF stand down, kind of how the field was responding to that, and my thoughts, and then I wanted your thoughts as well.
Sure.
And
You
much
bet.
like the PT episode, I think there's a good chance we're going to disagree on some things, but I think also like the PT episode, we're probably actually not going to disagree as much as I think we're going to disagree. So first, I guess we'll start with what was the event that led to the order, right? From everything I can tell, the riot at the Capitol really kind of triggered the Secretary of Defense to be concerned that there was a higher amount of veterans and active Guard and Reserve service members in that riot. So he ordered a stand down to kind of take a pause. I mean, they call it like a tactical pause, but really it's, let's stop for a second and really evaluate who we are and what we're doing. Some people call it an insurrection. Some people call it a protest. Some people call it a riot. Some people call it all these other things. But I think objectively, thousands of people rushed the Capitol, and 5 people died. 1 police officer, there's video that one Air Force veteran getting shot, I think in the upper chest or the throat, and just general. I mean, there was some legitimately, like me as a veteran, I was watching that unfold, and that was, to me, that was a very stressful sort of thing when you were seeing barricades in the chamber of Congress with people pointing guns out the door at United States citizens that were inside the building. Like, it felt like, to me, it could have been much, much worse. If it felt like it could have devolved into something much, much worse. I'm actually, might sound weird, I'm actually kind of happy with what the outcome was in the end. So that's kind of my take on it. What did you think of January 6th?
Well, there's schools of thought, like you said. One of them was the people were getting fed up with a lot of what they were seeing as being taken advantage of. And was it the right venue, the right way of going about it? No, you don't show up to something like that armed. You show up and you make your voice heard in a peaceful manner. And, when you have a lot of people, you can sway the thought process. But the moment that you show up armed to take over, well, if you're not going to finish the job of what you showed up for, then it was a lot of in vain actions. They didn't show up to do exactly what it is that I think that they set out to do, and that was to convince Congress, that they're fed up with what's coming out of the building. Well, what it did is that all it did was really incite Congress to take more restrictive measures. So it was, to me, counterintuitive of what should have actually happened, is to convince Congress that, we the people weren't really happy with what they're doing and how they're going about doing it. And honestly, they haven't been doing that for years.
Right. I agree. So from that, as I kind of detailed in the article, Secretary of Defense Austin sent out a memo on February 5th saying he's ordering a 1-day stand down for extremism training. And the link to that training makes mentions of extremist organizations, and it does a light touch on also including white supremacy into that. And, as we kind of talked about before, like overt white supremacy in the military is actually pretty rare. You might see some people that it's a little bit softer, where there's just sort of biases kind of coming into play in their decision making and things like that. But overall, you very rarely see active sort of overt white supremacists. Like there was that one, I think, Techer master in Colorado who was working for a white supremacist organization. I think it was like an you could clearly tell it was a white supremacist organization by their website and all these things. It was, the world would be better without, dark people or whatever it said. And he was handing out pamphlets and doing fundraising. And that's how he ran afoul of the military justice system, got admin demoted, and then admin stepped and lost his retirement. It was like at 17 years or something like that. I don't think that is in any way, shape, or form a rampant sort of issue in the military. And what I did with my articles, I really tried to paint that the options are either we have white supremacists at command levels disregarding the black SECDEF's order, or we have people that don't understand it's important or understand the optics of violating an order, or really the third option is we're just so task saturated and overworked in maintenance that we can't even afford the day. And that was the crux of my argument. So tell me what is your opinion of a 1-day stand down? What does that mean to you as somebody that's been a maintenance leader for quite a while?
Okay, so having had many stand downs for various reasons, and all of them had a reason for it. And if you're going to take it seriously, you take it seriously. But if it comes out half-hearted, it's exactly what it is. It's going to be half-hearted. You can have any kind of stand down and make it beneficial to the program or the reason for the stand down. But you have to be focused on it. In other words, you just can't throw something at a bunch of people at your leaders and say, we're having a stand down, this is Friday, we're having a stand down Monday, and these are the things we're going to talk about. Okay, I can guarantee you it is going to be met with resistance, and it's going to be met with a lot of this isn't going to work. And guess what? It isn't going to work. If you're going to enter into a stand down, it has to be calculated, it has to be planned, it has to be programmed in. And when I say programmed in, for maintenance, that program is your flying hour program. And on Thursday, you set your flying schedule for the following week. So can it be changed? Absolutely, everything can be changed. But if you don't program it in and you don't plan for it and you don't work for it, everything is going to be half-hearted. Do you have a stand down? Sure. Have the stand down a week out. Give your people time to make sure that they have all the tools that they need in their tool chest. Now, when I say tools, I mean the program that they're going to enter into and the ability to hold a competent stand down. So on Thursday, when you submit your flying plan to the wing, to group and to the wing, it says, we're going to do this on Monday. And here's what Monday is going to look like. Monday is going to be no flying, nobody working, nothing happens. So on Friday, we're going to go to a one go day. We're going to get all of the maintenance done on Friday. Nothing happens on the flight line on Monday. You get everything done on Friday. Nothing happens on Monday. Nothing happens on Monday. And so on Tuesday, instead of flying a first go, you fly the second go. And people look at you and go, well, you only fly one go. Well, in
Right.
maintenance,
You're talking the later
maintenance,
afternoon go, yeah.
maintenance, the later afternoon. And that way you have time to, do your pre-flights, do your servicing checks, do everything that you need in order for you to get the aircraft up and running. And on that Monday, that week prior, on that Monday, you are able to have those good discussions, those really solid discussions that you need, along with all of the talking points that are being presented to you. And if you take a look at it, you see, oh, there's something else we can add to this. And then you add that something else to the talking points to clarify the whatever. You have time to get it all taken care of. But if you rush to it and it's half-hearted from the leadership team, then guess what? Any stand down that you have is going to be half-hearted. Nobody's going to remember a thing about it.
So why, in your scenario, is the stand down on a Monday instead of a Friday? Wouldn't a stand down be better on a Friday than a Monday?
I looked at it because, because here's what's going to happen on the week. You're going to be flying all week, and you're going to come to Thursday, and you're going to have 42 broke airplanes. If you don't fly on Friday, you're going to be working the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
If you stand down on a Monday, you've gotten to your normal Friday, which is typically in most places a one go day.
Right.
Typically Friday is only one go, and that's because you've reached the end of your week, and it gives you a chance to not have to work into the weekend. And
and then also, like, realistically, it props up your Monday because everybody knows you've rolled some broke jets into Friday, and if
yes.
you can lengthen your non-concurrent with flying maintenance window into
Yep.
Friday night, so your swing shift is only focused on fixing jets and nothing
Yep.
else, plus your weekend duty, you're more likely to have your full front on Monday as needed.
Absolutely. And you can have that full front on Monday, and have your down day, your stand down on Monday, and then your jets are ready to go on Tuesday.
Plus, there's also the logistics of, if you're doing a normal week Monday through Thursday with a stand down on Friday, what is swing shift and mid shift doing? There's the whole logistics of figuring out, does swing shift work a partial day Thursday night so they can come in for a full day on Friday? Are you splitting up the training, which it certainly wasn't explicit that the train could be split up, but I think you and I both know that when you have all shifts in at the same time, that typically the quality of your stand down is better because you're also using it as like a team building of, let's get people from one shift that may not be able to interact with people from another shift more than just a turnover, get them in the same room. And then there might be some strife there that's on topic that you can kind of work into this anyway and really kind of spend a day, barbecue a little bit, cut the people out, give them a good weekend and all the other stuff. So, a Friday, trying to shoehorn a stand down into Friday. And you know what, if I were a betting man, it's probably because most commanders are looking at Friday as a one go day and go, if we do a stand down there, we're only losing this amount of sorties.
Yep.
If we do it Monday, we're losing essentially, double-ish sorties because we're turning lines, and it becomes really a cost benefit sort of analysis.
You can work with your operators to forgo some of those actions. And so, for instance, instead of that Friday of the week of the stand down, instead of it be a one go, it's a two go. You figure out where you can add in the lost sorties the lost training for the operators. You can work together, and that's the key to a competent stand down, is to work together.
That's a good point too, because in this case, the SECDEF released a memo on February 5th, and he said commanders have within the next 60 days to hold this stand down. That's a pretty long lead.
It is.
If I assume there were probably some training days there was probably, typically in my experience, there's one training day or safety day per quarter. And if the SECDEF is talking about a 1-day stand down in February, that's bridging 2 quarters. Essentially, it's bridging the first quarter and then into the second quarter, or if you're talking fiscal year, you're talking second quarter and the third quarter. You probably have a programmed down day, a part of the normal yearly sort of allocation of down days for safety or training. And for me, regardless of whether I think the stand down is necessary on a topic that matters or anything else, still it's a SECDEF mandated stand down. It is the highest ranking person in the military, save the president, right? And if he says do a stand down and I'm like, well, I got this training day, I'm just going to forego the training day, because I think it's also like, okay, the training day, it's usually in maintenance, it's usually a half day ish or something. And I remember when I was a section chief, every training day I had to get together this agenda for the day. And as I'm making it, I'm like, this is bullshit. This is bullshit. This is bullshit. And I see these huge gaps at times. I used to tell my guys, when you run out of shit to do on this training day, don't be sitting around the fucking break room where the chief and the captain can see you. Go to the locker room, go out to the, when I was in the 3-way, go out to the other building, play cards out there. I don't fucking care. Come back at 1:00 when the next training is starting, but don't be seen sitting around, because people are going to get mad. And I think that's pretty typical. It's let's do pre-flight training, which is a wink and a nod to, we're really just going to do fucking pre-flights on this day is what's going to happen. Or, whatever it is. And often will turn into, let's train people how to remove an engine because we have an engine to remove. Or let's, on a safety day, let's train people how to safely remove an engine. We all shoehorn these things in. But I think there was probably a training day or safety day somewhere in that 60-day window, realistically, or you could reallocate your training day to that day, talk to ops and be like, hey, the training day in March, whatever, is canceled. We're going to take that down day here. So we're not actually even losing any sorties. We're going to do it on a Monday. And that seems like a pretty, I mean, yeah, it's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback and it's easy to throw grenades from the outside as retirees. But it just seems like swapping a training, like no one's going to get mad that you dumped a training day to do the SECDEF mandated down day so you can meet your sortie goal. I don't think anybody's going to be fucking mad about that. And this is coming from a guy saying we suck at training and all TBA are basically lies. I'm the person that says that. And I'm also saying fuck a training day, because the reality is the training day doesn't typically do anything anyway.
No, your leadership has to be focused on the training event that I want to say matters. All training matters, but for instance, we only had a couple of folks that were qualified in secondary power at one of the bases I was at, and I would go out there and routinely see the same person sitting at the aircraft fixing secondary power, and it dawned on me that maybe my depth in this area isn't as deep as it needs to be. So I went to the section. I said, hey, man, what's going on? How many people you got? Now, we only got 2 or 3, and we're about to deploy. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. There's going to be a jet sitting back over on the back row, and I want you guys to go out there and train as many of your skilled craftsmen on secondary power as you can. I would like to at least double the number of people who can do secondary power, remove it and install it. And then we're going to get with AFITS and we're going to set up some troubleshooting training. So, and that was outside of the training day. We did that outside of a training day because we had to. And it was because I was seeing this glaring problem that we had. And it was, if something would have happened and we'd have deployed in and I didn't have the secondary power guys there to do it, that was not the place to not have skilled people to do the job.
Yeah, I'm going to do a quick sidebar just because it's applicable to your story. When I was in Korea in 2003, I worked phase, and some warrant officer came in one day. And first of all, I had never seen a warrant officer before, and I had no fucking idea how to address him. So I just went with sir. I saw these like squares. And I'm like, he's too old to be a cadet. I don't know what the fuck's going on here. So I was going to call him sir. Sir seems like a good fallback. And basically, they had F-18s that had come in TDY to Osan, and they had set up with TA to service their missile gas for their. It wasn't argon.
Yeah, sure.
And he's like, yeah, they can't do it now. We have no way to basically service our missiles. I'm wondering, and he showed me. He's like, can you? And I was like, oh, come out and take a look. And when I looked, it was a Schrader valve. And I walked up and I was like, oh, it's a Schrader valve. I can teach you. And they're like, it was like apes around a monolith. I mean, they're Marines. I'm trying to bash on them, but they were like, I was like the prophet or something. And they're like, you know how to work this? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, can you come out and train us? I was like, yeah, I mean, it's a Schrader valve. If you let me know how much PSI to give it, I'll be able to teach everybody in 20 minutes or something. So I went back to the shop and I got, an air chuck and everything. I came out and there was an old 8-bottle night cart. And, the first thing I did to explain to him was, don't open all these valves at the same time. Like, you'll just equalize. And they looked at me like, I don't understand what you're saying, but you seem smart, so I'm just going to listen to you. Like, I didn't want to get into the physics of equalizing pressure. Mm-hmm. So, I explained that, and then I hooked up the air chuck and I hooked up the Schrader valve. I'm like, you're just going to open this, and this is the Schrader valve. You're going to open this, and it'll fill up. And when it's full, close this, and just undo everything. And they're like, that's great. And I said, well, who services this when you're back at home station? Oh, we have like people that do it. I'm like, okay, so do you not have like instructions on how to do this? Or like, well, no. I'm like, what do you mean no? I'm like, well, we don't have instructions. We just know how to do it. I'm like, well, how do you learn? He's like, well, we teach each other. And I'm like, so none of you guys know how to do this? They're like, no. I'm like, well, who knows how to do things? And there was this old, I'm not trying to bash on him because I'm fat too. There was this old fat Marine that was like walking down the ramp, and they're like, that guy knows how to do everything. And I'm like, okay, what happens if he fucking dies? Like, is that
right?
They're like, well, we're really protective of him. I'm like, this is the most bizarre shit I've ever seen in my entire life. So that is very much akin to what you're talking about. Yeah, one guy knows how to do secondary power. If that dude gets sick, quits, or whatever, you're going to be left totally bereft. But to get back on point to the training day, like training days are certainly important, but in this particular instance, and there's probably really valid arguments why the stand down isn't important, because I think most of the time stand downs don't work. Or let me rephrase that. I think people expect stand downs to affect some immediate change in this condition. But I think the reality is a stand down is meant to do two things. One, it's to pause and relay some really important message or information from the field to whoever's ordering the stand down. And the second thing is it sends a message that this is more important than flying sorties. This is more important than your mission for that day. We're taking one day out of 365 to stop these things, to give your full attention. And so that way you understand that this is super important. And, you look at in 2019 and in September, the Air Force pretty much announced they had a suicide problem. It was the highest rates of suicide they'd ever seen. And they said they're going to take a tactical pause, which is just another name for a stand down. It's stand down for a day. And I'd like to point out that the 2020 numbers mirrored the 2019 numbers. So clearly the stand down didn't fix the suicide problem, I would argue, because we're just trying to treat symptoms and we're not treating causes. But that's where that discussion, like, can you imagine me in one of those stand down days? Like, I would be burning the fucking building down with words of, yeah, the problem is we're working our people to death. Like, that's the time to have those conversations. But I think the reality is, like, the suicide stand down, and I think also a lot of those suicide stand downs were full days. So, like, I think if you look at the history of stand downs, I think there were some for sexual assault, sexual harassment, especially after the Vanessa Guillen sort of incident, at least in the Army, certainly at Fort Hood, I think it was her duty station, which ended up being a fucking dumpster fire of toxic leaders and corruption. I think those like it looks even worse because historically we did 1 day stand downs for sexual assault, sexual harassment. We did 1 day full stand downs without work for suicide. And then this particular stand down comes along and I start hearing from, not only did I hear from 1 or 2 places initially, the comments I got both here and other social media sites pretty much was universal that nobody's treating it as a full day stand down. And what struck me as really disconcerting about that was, of all topics to blow off, like I'm big on blowing off bullshit. Like that's my jam. I blew off bullshit all the fucking time in the military. But this is the one topic where blowing it off is the worst possible decision to make, because this topic in particular is about insubordination and disloyalty of military members. And I think that is really dangerous thing to blow off, because it goes back to what end does that help? Because now you're feeding, like if you are of the camp that it was a protest at the Capitol and it wasn't an insurrection, and you don't think there's a problem with extremism and white supremacy in the military, and then you blow off this training, how does it look on the outside? It looks on the outside like this is a bigger problem than it actually is, because you have all these people that are now not doing a lawful and direct order from SECDEF.
Yeah, the optic is bad. There's no question when you're not addressing what's being asked, and that goes with all of them. If the Air Force or the Department of Defense is telling you to stand down for Resiliency Day, stand down for bystander training, stand down for extremism, stand down, fill in the blank. Take it seriously. Don't give the optic of you don't care. Whether or not, that's your intention. You may have all of the great intentions of it being you taking it seriously. And, for all intents and purposes, the leaders are taking it seriously. If you don't have the optic to go with the words, then your words mean nothing. Your words mean nothing.
No, and I think you're right. And a lot of the feedback I got was the training was not very good. And I'd argue that the training is rarely good on stand downs or on non-AFSC specific training anyway. Most of the time the military,
right.
Like you look at the maintenance culture episode, the second episode 31 with Mike Sissel, where we talked about the 4 pillars, that whole thing is trash. Like the military is fairly decent, much like the episode with Hoppy, of doing training and getting people spun up, if not sometimes a little bit quick, depending on the complexity and the need for people to be out in the field. I've often said that the training is good on paper, but very often in practice, it doesn't do well. But in this case, none of the stand down training is very good, but it's about the messaging of we take this seriously.
Right. It's up to the leaders of the unit to make the training beneficial. Okay. You can take it to heights, you can take it to lows, but it's up to that organization's leader. For instance, the squadron commander, the group chief, the OIC, the AMU chief, the section chief, they all have to take it seriously. And if you had 60 days to do it and you did it quickly and they said that the training was poor, well, it's because they rushed to just check a box. And frankly, if that's the case, and I'm not saying it is, but surely the optics show that that was the case, maybe they should have taken a little bit more time to funnel it through some checks and balances to make sure that they were getting the message to who needed to get the message to everybody in the manner in which it needed to be passed on. Instead, now it looks like there was, as you say, insubordination. I wouldn't call it insubordination because they did it. They did what, they performed the task. So it's really not blatant insubordination, but it's certainly not the visual that those of us on the outside, standing out on the outside looking in, see as being conducive to the proper environment, if you will. And that goes with all of them.
I would argue that when the SECDEF orders a 1-day stand down and certain units do a half day with a half day of work, that was insubordinate, and they did not follow an explicit order from SECDEF.
That sounds reasonable. That sounds reasonable.
Okay.
I would say it would be more insubordinate if they didn't do it at all.
That's fair.
I
think there's varying degrees. I think my whole career was varying degrees of insubordination and fairness.
Well,
right.
And honestly, we could go down that rabbit hole if you wanted to, but in a lot of cases, there are times when I won't want to say insubordination is needed, but you have to, because I would never say insubordination is needed. But there are times when you have to adjust what is being told to you to ensure that it works. For instance, I was the guy that I'm going to tell you what to do, not how to do it, because I expect you as a leader to do it. And I don't care how you get to the end result, but if I tell you not to do something, I don't care how you think you should do it. If I told you not to do it, my expectation is my subordinates didn't do it, period. End of discussion. You don't do what somebody told you not to do. But if they said do it, but don't tell you how to do it, well, now you have freedom
Creative
of
liberty.
creative liberty to do it however you see fit. And then when the person comes back and says, well, that's not how I would have done it, it doesn't matter. The job got done, and that's it.
So I guess another point is, that letter and the training also specified that there should be discussions from people in your unit to help them work through their thoughts and how things are for biases and how they feel treated and how they feel either included or not included in the team. And my initial thoughts were, if maintenance has already scheduled this to only be a half day to get through whatever the mandated sort of instruction and training is, even though there's a whole discussion component for each piece of training that I don't know how long that shit's going to take. Like, when's the last time we've had an extremism training to ask junior airmen how they feel in the unit or how they're treated or how they're perceived? That could go on. I feel like that could go on for a long fucking time. And I get the distinct impression that if you cook in a set end time at a half day, and you've also determined there's going to be maintenance, be it pre-flights, pull-in forms, whatever it might be, which to any maintainer, when you hear, we also have to do this, that's the dog whistle to, you're not going home until this is done, right? Like, that's not even ambiguous. That's going to stifle discussion. It's not going to allow people to work through. I mean, how many times in this podcast have I said, Kurtis, we got to wrap up at an hour? And how many things did you not get to? Right. I'm literally doing it. Right. Yeah. I'm literally doing it because I have a set timeline. So, coming in, there's certain things you're just not going to get to talk about because I'm not giving you the time to do so. If I gave you double the time, I wonder how much more things you could say. And I don't mean to sound like a fucking tyrant here. The reality is the people listening are like, I can only do an hour of this shit. So, yeah. So I guess my thought is, if maintenance is already, because there's no way, as I wrote in the article, there's no fucking way maintenance leaders made a decision on the fly as maintainers were getting released from the 1 day stand down on extremism to call them all in and do some work. That, as somebody that's been in maintenance, the logistical lift on that to do basically a short notice recall of every maintainer, that's not a thing. So they had to know before that training started that they were going to bring their maintainers in. And they probably told their maintainers at an earlier roll call, hey, when training is done on Friday, you're going to come in and we have a little bit of work to do before you go home, period.
Yeah. And that very well could have been. I wasn't there. I couldn't surmise that was how it would be. But having been in the training days where it's set for you to do something, and honestly, you have exhausted all of the list of things that you had to do. Well, yeah, okay. I look at that as a little bit different because I had, 3 things that we really had to get done, and those were 2 hours long. Okay. And there really wasn't anything else that we could, tackle on that day. So halfway through the day, it's, production comes to me and everybody's standing around looking at each other. Chief, can we do some work out on the flight line? Well, bring me all the section chiefs and let's talk about this. Okay. What do we got? What do we need to do? Is there anything else that we missed, overlooked on this training day? And when everybody's head was shaking left to right, if we have some work to do, well, let's use the opportunity to maybe get some airmen out there to do something heavy if we got the heavy thing going on, and we can get some training on that piece. But that's the only time that I could see that happening is when you're in a routine schedule. But this was something different. This is something that had never been addressed before, much like the first resiliency day that happened, in 2013, 2014. We'd never done that before. So that was all day. And we took all day to do that. And we didn't do any maintenance on anything. But we did have, a cookout, at the end of it. And just to kind of, make sure that everybody was,
it seems
being
like
open and honest.
It seems like they're, I know it's, like I said, it's really easy to be a Monday morning quarterback on these things, but it seems like you prepare for a full day of training and you have whoever your person is running a burger burn towards the end, get the burgers ready. And if people get done early, then go outside and get something to eat. And then you just let them go home.
Yeah.
I mean, I know trust me, like I was an expediter, and anybody that worked for me as an expediter, which I assume there's a couple people that work for me as an expediter that listen, I was fucking not good at giving cutbacks. I always felt like there was too much to do and I couldn't afford to let anybody go. And when I finally stepped away from the truck and somebody else took over, they started giving cutbacks immediately. And I was like, okay, you're way better at this than me because you can balance between getting the job done and also cutting back. And the reality is cutting people back where you can, it recharges their batteries and they work better when they fucking come back in because they got to do all those things that lets them decompress from the tension and the tempo. Like if they should have planned for a full day, just suck it up, take the full day. Your optics are all good. Have a burger burn running, towards the end, like 3 p.m, start cooking the burgers. So by 4, they're ready to eat. And if the training's still going on, people can step out and grab and bring it back in or whatever. And then if people go home at 4:30, have a good day. Enjoy yourself.
Yep.
Like that seems like a very reasonable plan. And I don't understand how so many units, I mean, I do understand. They fumbled it because they could not afford, they felt like they could not afford. We're talking 4 hours, Curtis. 4 fucking hours. If we're talking half days, like half day of extremism training and half days of pre-flights or whatever. It's 4 fucking hours.
Yep.
And they couldn't afford that. 4 hours. They could not afford.
I think if they had the, okay. So I want to just talk about the resiliency day and maybe we'll have that conversation on a different podcast.
I know I keep promising, right?
And, but the resiliency day, there was this list. It was so long, it took me a couple of days just to digest everything that was in this list. And I knew in one day that we were never going to get to the end of everything that was on this list. And it was unfortunate because now I'm faced with having to pick and choose from this incredibly long list of all of the things that we were going to talk about. And so, I set it up in groups. So they rotated, people rotated in groups. So there was different perspectives being taken, but you had to take it seriously going in. But I had plenty of time to digest the information that was presented to me. And I was able to ask questions, and we were able to get clarification before we started. And by the end of that day, you had literally seen the people who had never talked to each other before having full-blown conversations about where they lived and where they grew up. They learned a lot about each other that day. And I think that's what they needed to strive for in any down day that you take. You want to make sure that everybody is participating. And in this case, with the extremist training, all you have to do is have people talking, and hearing perspectives and hearing things that, maybe you didn't know, and that you just didn't clearly understand because of your environment that you grew up in.
And I think that's a good point, because much like we've talked about offline, I think America in general has lost the ability to have a discussion with competing viewpoints, with disagreements, where you can work through and compromise on the things you can compromise, or without emotion, detach yourself from people that share different views and experiences, but still be able to hear what they're saying. And I think the default for most people now is to, and I'm just as fucking guilty of this as other people, is to shut down and either not allow other people to share their thoughts, or not listening to other people's thoughts, or, I hate to use stupid fucking buzzwords, so I'm going to stay away from it. But, and so extremism training, I would argue that DOD, SECDEF, and whoever else probably didn't understand the nuance of these discussions of, part of it is, I think there's a lot of arguments that go into it where, what is extremism training? Because it wasn't clearly defined in the memo. Later, they came out with the training and they defined it. But a lot of people saw extremism training as, if you voted for Donald Trump, you're an extremist.
Yep.
I seriously doubt that was the training. I think the news cycle would have already blown the fuck up if it was. But I think people assumed that was going to be the conversation, and you're going to put them in a tinderbox of a room over politics. It essentially became a political discussion within a unit, because the guardrails were not defined of what extremism is. It should have been I think later on in the training it was defined, but the memo did not.
No.
So the messaging, it's like, we're going to do a thing on extremism, and I'm not going to tell you what the fuck extremism is until the day of the training. You've already shut down people wanting to engage in that training, because you're saying you are an enemy of the people. Never mind the fact that the people that sit on that side of the political spectrum truly, and the people at the Capitol, most of them believe themselves to be patriots, right? Like, they were trying to preserve the institution of our democracy in the United States, because they were afraid that it was under attack from, within, right?
Yes.
And that there is an argument to be made there. I think, like we said at the beginning, most people feel like Congress and the government isn't working in our best interest a lot of the time. But when you're phrasing that training so poorly in the memo, you've already shut off. I wouldn't even say 50%, because I think the military probably leaned a little bit. I think the data, and who knows how good the data is, because polling is such a it's an objective outcome from a subjective process, where you can kind of get the outcome that you want. But I think the data, don't quote me on this, was a lot of enlisted leaned towards Donald Trump. I think something like 60 to 70% of enlisted leaned towards Donald Trump, and some of the officers, it was like 40% or something like that. But the reality is, when you're looking at, through poor messaging making 60% of your force feeling like that we are holding a stand down to convince them to stop voting a certain way, you need to get that messaging way better, because I think what we're seeing is this half-day stand down is because I think a lot of people weren't bought in that there was a problem.
And you and I both know that messaging in the military is problematic. They don't usually get the words out. In their brain, they know what they're thinking, but when they put it down on paper, or they tell them, get this out really quick, and we'll follow up with more information. Well, when that information gets out there, we're trained, if you will, to read through some of the things to get to the end. Now, as we're reading through it, we may not be getting it right. Okay. We're guessing. Anytime that there's poor communication on any subject, you're going to get a poor outcome. And you and I both know that, in the polling area, statistics can be manipulated to do whatever it is that you want it to do. And, I've did that for years with EPRs and our, metrics. I was able to, instead of, 10 out of 10 metrics, we achieved, the one metric that we have never been able to achieve before. We did it, in, resounding fashion. Okay. I used one metric out of 10 to make it look good, or arguing for more, whatever. I'll use the 9 metrics as the way that I need to get something. So I don't ever take a poll as, as the gospel, because it's somebody manipulating something somewhere for some reason. And unless you do 100%, a poll is a sample size of potentially people that you selected.
And they could also lie, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like when I get called for polls, I'm like, yeah, I just say the opposite of all of my thoughts on everything just to fuck with their data.
Yeah. And what they're expecting is, oh crap, well, that wasn't what we were expecting, and now they're all sideways, because they were trying to get a response and they didn't get the response, and now they don't know where to go. But I think that, and our today's inability to communicate properly has a lot to do with keyboard warriors. People get behind a keyboard and they're not in the room with anybody, and they don't have the conversation to have that's going to disagree or argue with the person. And so they say things, but aren't really ever personally confronted. And I can spill this over into resiliency, is to when somebody gets, when somebody gets confronted that they've never been personally confronted with before, that adds a crisis in their life, So I think that, people are really good to be behind a keyboard, and they don't necessarily want to, and maybe during the conversation that they were having at these, extremist days, some people are sitting in the quiet corner just being quiet because they just didn't want to say anything to anybody, because they didn't know how it was going to be taken by the other people in the room.
I think that's a good point too. I think very much like a lot of the podcasts I've done, and also just discussions outside the podcast and things, that a lot of things I've done with Ashley. I think part of it is there's a level of trust that the person you're going to engage with is going to engage in good faith, that they are willing to give you floor time to make your point, not try to tease out one misstated word and attack you on it because you didn't pick the right word, which maintainers are bad at using words anyway, right? And they're willing to rebut, and they're also like giving indications they're willing to change their mind, or at least absorb your perspective as a data point they're willing to consider for things. And I think a lot of discussions and debate, both more so online than in person, but also in person, is about scoring points and it's not in good faith. Or, I mean, there's been many times where somebody just kept arguing just to, they call it sea lioning, just to make you chase down all these stats for them that they're never going to fucking read. They're never going to look at. They're never going to change their mind. And you realize you spent an hour of your day where you thought you were engaged in a good faith debate with someone that was never going to change their mind. And I think that's a distinct symptom we're seeing in America and in, probably the military as well, further exacerbated by the fact that commanders don't have to listen to their people. There's a rank hierarchy where people are almost explicitly told, we didn't issue your feelings. And it's like literally shut up in color. Shut up in color is the mantra of almost every military branch in every career field. Like, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm not going to listen to your complaints. You need to shut up in color because that's what we need to do to get the mission done. And so when we have that baked into the culture, something like this, it requires like a nuanced discussion with a back and forth and good faith. I don't think military people have developed the social skills to do that well at all. So you need like actual facilitators, like real people that understand how this works in order to come down and engage in that discussion and guide it. And I think the military with you saw it on like suicide stand downs. It's like, we have a master sergeant leading this discussion. He doesn't know shit about shit. Like, he could be good at it, but the odds are when you don't plan for this, you don't have the right people in the position, and you're trying to amateur a fucking serious problem with people that don't have the credentials to navigate it. And that's fucking reckless. It's not good.
Right. And, part of that is, that piece is asking somebody to counsel somebody on suicide, on suicide. What was it? The virtual reality goggles that they had for having a conversation, suicide training. Okay, that some of that is professional matters, professional stuff. So your job as the leader is to refer them quickly to get the help that they need from a professional who is able to suss out some of these issues. Don't stand there and trying to figure out yourself whether or not that person has the issues. If they meet the criteria of what you've been trained for that the experts have set up, then refer them and then let the experts, the licensed counselors, deal with that piece. You mentioned the shut up and color and do your thing. There is only one time that I would ever say that shut up and color is the time to do it. I
assume war, right? War, right?
Well, yes, but it's life and death.
Yeah.
You're confronted with life and death. Now is not the time. If I'm handing you a M4 to stand a post, now is not the time to have the argument that I'm just a maintainer. There's a reason I'm asking you or telling you to go stand over there and shoot anything that comes at you, because chances are I already have the intelligence that somebody is already inside the wire, and we got to make sure that we're safe. Outside of that, where it's life or death, no.
And so that's a great point. I'm glad you mentioned it. So what you're talking about is trust.
Mm-hmm.
That guy in that moment trusts from your history and background, for all your leadership, that if you're asking him to do this thing now, he trusts you that this is the best possible thing because it's not up for debate. And you have a long history of good judgment, good leadership for him to pull from to go, if Chief Ott's telling me to stand here with this M4 and I can't, it's no room for debate and it's just got to do it. Well, he gave me time to discuss and debate for the last 3 years, and he gave us time, and he asked us what we needed, and he always engaged in a good discussion and conversation. He explained things when he could. In this particular instance, if he's saying he can't, I trust him. And I think this really goes back to The extremism training too, and I'm probably going to touch lightly on the COVID vaccine just because I think it ties in. Like, you're seeing really low COVID vaccination numbers from the military, and you're seeing low adherence to the 1-day stand down for extremism in the military. And I think both of those go back to the same issue. Like, I think there's a real issue in the military of we don't trust our leadership. And I think it comes down to, again, and I'm a fucking broken record on this, I think military members don't feel heard by their local command a lot of the time. I think that's a symptom of low bars for command because of low amounts of maintenance officers that are staying in and filling those slots. I think they don't feel heard by the Air Force in general. And that goes back to my advocacy on suicides. Like, let's see suicide numbers by AFSCs. Let's solve this fucking problem. And the Air Force is solely focused on how to make people tolerate a terrible sort of environment, right? And I think they don't feel heard on the health of the fleet. They don't feel heard on the experience of the personnel. They don't feel heard on social issues. I think they just don't trust at this point that military leadership, A, knows what the fuck's going on in the field, and B, even if they do know, I mean, that's almost worse. Like, either they're dumb or they're ignorant and they don't know what the fuck's going on at the lowest level, or worse, they do know and they're still doing the same fucking things. Both of those are a violation of trust, because there is a duty as a leader to get to the field level to understand the experiences of the lowest ranking person. If you're not doing that, you've failed. Like, that's the reason why the war movies, the general walks the encampment the night before the fight, talking with all the people sitting around the fire. Like, every fucking war movie has the guy walking and talking to the lowest ranking people to get a feel for the force. We're not doing that. And we're trying to supplant it with social media hashtags and some other bullshit and influencing stuff that doesn't fucking work, right? And it probably makes people feel cheated because the messaging doesn't align to what their experiences are. But if we're not seeking that lowest level stuff, we've failed. And if we do know how bad it is and we're not doing everything we can to make it better, that's worse. But both of those outcomes violate a trust. And so now what we're seeing issues of people blowing off the 1-day stand down because they don't trust that it was made for the right reason. They probably felt it was political and they felt personally attacked. They don't trust that they'll be able to reduce their sorties for the year for that down day. They don't trust that their careers aren't going to be impacted by those low numbers. They don't trust that the training is going to be useful. They don't trust that the COVID vaccine is, efficient and safe. Like, of all national security concerns that we're going to have over the next decade, I truly believe that the lowest level people and the military member simply does not trust their leadership and in effect their government, which goes back to the riot at the Capitol where 20% of the participants were veteran service members. That is literally, I don't trust you to do right by me.
I literally just wrote that down. I wrote down, trust is why the people were in the Capitol building. They were there because of massive trust issues. And there's still massive trust issues that are going on. And it's, they're getting deeper. And a lot of it is from the fact that, people aren't communicating with each other. And based on from what my congressman has been sending out, there is no communication going on inside the Capitol building, except in separate rooms, but they're not communicating with each other to hear what's best for a nation. And I think that's a lot of why a lot of the people were standing there. And once again, I'm not condoning the fact that they showed up there at the Capitol building with guns. If you're going to show up with a gun and you point that gun at somebody, you better be prepared to do exactly what that gun is supposed to do. If that's what you were going to do, then do it.
And just to be clear, you're also not advocating for violent
No. And I'm not. But once again, the communication piece is they would have been better off, if they'd have left all of their firearms at home and then marched on the Capitol building in a peaceful manner and not left until they saw the people in the positions that they needed to see, that were there and heard what was coming out of the people's mouths.
Correct.
Not leave until they heard it. And that's how it has been since, for the past 240 years.
Okay, so let's wrap up, and I'm gonna ask you what you would have done for the down day. And I think we've already kind of done a little bit. So it would have been on a Monday. It would have been a one go Friday and a late one go Tuesday. So that way you weren't impacting weekend duty. I think we both agree we probably would have foregone a training or safety day in the quarter to use that sortie loss for the extremism training. I suspect it would have been a full day scheduled, running concurrent with maybe some morale boosting stuff, whatever it might be. Anything else? I mean, that seems like a fucking a slam dunk. I don't understand how so many people screwed this fucking thing up.
Yeah. And I don't either. Honest to goodness, I don't understand how you can't get that piece right, except for the fact that the communication piece was probably broken. That's why I think a lot of it didn't happen, is because the communication piece was broken.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Like, I talked to DOD PA, and he went on the record. He's like, yeah, it's meant to be a full day in lieu of work. And I said, okay, well, meant to be, did the SECDEF direct it to be a full day in lieu of work? He said, yes. And then when I called every other PA, they're like, well, it doesn't have to be a full day. I'm like, okay, well, I have DOD PA on the record here. Let me read what he said. And they were all, you could hear the panic. And that wasn't because they were intentionally lying to me. They literally didn't fucking know.
Right.
Or they weren't sure, or whatever. Or I'd already wrote an article that basically said everybody had disregarded the SECDEF, and they were trying to create a narrative where a half day was okay or acceptable. But I really feel like it wasn't that heavy of a lift, and we sometimes we fumbled the dumbest shit. Yep. I can't even fucking explain it.
We fumble because we don't have communication. And the one thing that I do know is when you have strong communications, you have a strong unit. When you have a strong unit, you don't have the suicide issues. You don't have the low maintenance metrics. You don't have that. You communicate. And so, my final words in this would be, I would implore leaders at all of the levels that are listening to this, whether you're leading people in the Pentagon or not, if you're leading people in the field or not, or if you're leading people in a civilian work environment, take the time with an open mind, listen to your people, understand the who, the what, the where, the when, the why, the how, understand all of that, and then communicate back. Communication is two ways. It goes out and it comes back. It goes out and it comes back. And more times that you do that, the more trust is developed, more trust exists with your people and within you.
So we ended up not disagreeing. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, we didn't disagree again. Yeah,
right.
maybe if we do the resiliency thing, that maybe we'll have a discussion.
I still don't think so. I always think I'm going to disagree, and then we just come up with solutions. Yeah. So we'll do Kurtis Ott for SECDEF and Chris McGee for SECF, and we'll get all this shit sorted out.
Oh, hell no. I don't want any part of that. Yeah, I'm okay. I'm okay being what I am.
All right. Well, Kurtis, thanks for taking an hour out of your day. I really appreciate it. And if you haven't already listened to Kurtis's other episodes, he did a great one on micromanagement and leadership, which I think was a couple episodes ago, but take a listen to that one as well. Other than that, thanks, Kurtis, and adios.